The house is sold. You are leaving today. My mother-in-law spoke those words like she was reading a weather report. Calm. Measured. Utterly certain. She stood beside my husband on our front steps, holding a slim folder against her chest while the evening wind moved through the trees. Daniel refused to meet my eyes. I stood at the end of the driveway, still holding my car keys, still smiling from the conversation I had less than an hour before. $7 million. My grandmother's estate, finally settled. I had driven home imagining the relief we would finally share. Instead, my husband stood beside his mother like a stranger waiting to process paperwork. The movers already cleared the garage. Patricia continued. Your remaining items are in storage. I blinked slowly. Daniel finally spoke, but his voice sounded rehearsed. We need to sign these today. 27 years reduced to a single afternoon. I looked past them toward the house. The porch swing he built a decade ago was gone. The garden beds I tended every spring had been cleared. Even the curtains had changed. That was when I understood. This was not sudden. It had been arranged carefully. Probably for months. Patricia stepped down one stair and held the papers toward me. You should handle this while we remain reasonable. Reasonable. I almost smiled. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. When did you decide this? Daniel rubbed his temple as if I were exhausting him. Please do not complicate what is already settled. Complicate. I thought about the leather folder resting on my passenger seat. I thought about the attorney who had shaken my hand that morning. I thought about my grandmother's quiet warnings during her final weeks. Now those warnings suddenly made perfect sense. Patricia folded her arms neatly. You will adjust quickly. People always do. There was something almost impressive about how easily she disguised control as concern. I met that woman when I was 34. She never liked me. Not openly, of course. She was too refined for open hostility. She preferred quiet corrections delivered inside gentle advice. You are so independent, she would say. Some men find that difficult forever. Small remarks. Year after year. And Daniel always defended her. She does not mean it that way. That became the quiet rhythm of our marriage. Patricia glanced toward the street impatiently. You really should depart before the new owners arrive. New owners. The phrase settled strangely in my mind. Then Daniel finally looked at me. The property closed 3 days ago. 3 days. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting beside my grandmother's hospital bed, holding her fading hand. 3 days earlier, my husband had apparently signed away our home without a word. Something inside me should have broken. Instead, a different memory surfaced. My grandmother's voice, calm and steady. Never sign anything while someone is rushing you. At the time, I thought she meant ordinary caution. Now I knew better. Patricia moved the papers closer. Sign now or later. It makes no difference to us. Us. That word told me everything. This was not a marriage ending. This was a removal. And she had arranged it. Daniel finally sighed. The title was under my name. Legally, you have no standing. That sentence nearly made me smile. I looked at the porch. At the man I once trusted. At the woman who spent decades trying to quietly erase me from her son's life. Then I smiled. A quiet, steady, genuine smile. Daniel frowned immediately. What is amusing about this? I glanced at the papers in her hands. Then I looked at the house behind them. Softly, almost gently, I said. Actually, the house you sold truly belonged to. I met Daniel at a summer fundraiser in Denver. He spilled lemonade on my linen dress, apologized for 20 minutes, then asked me to dinner before the night ended. Back then, his eyes held warmth. Safety. For years, he really was safe. Until Patricia became the quiet third presence in our marriage. not all at once. Never openly. She entered through small openings, offering to help when we struggled financially after the market downturn, suggesting better contractors when we renovated the kitchen, gently questioning whether our vacation plans were practical. Each gesture seemed generous. Each one quietly shifted authority away from us and toward her, when our business faced unexpected losses. Patricia stepped in with paperwork, contacts, and calm reassurance. "Let me handle the refinancing," she said. "You two focus on recovery." I was grateful. Exhausted. Relieved someone had answers. Daniel deferred to her instantly. That was the moment I should have noticed, the ease with which he surrendered decision-making. But I told myself it was temporary. That we were just weathering a storm together. Holidays became subtle negotiations. "Patricia prefers Christmas Eve dinner early," Daniel would say. Or, "Mom thinks the guest list is too large." I adjusted. Always. Because that's what I was taught: protect the marriage, keep peace, absorb discomfort quietly. My grandmother watched this unfold from afar. During one visit, as we sat on her porch overlooking the Aspens, she stirred her tea slowly and said, "She inserts herself into your life like smoke under a door. You don't notice until the whole room smells of her." I defended Patricia. Defended Daniel, too. "She means well," I insisted. Eleanor simply nodded. Good intentions rarely prevent harm when boundaries are ignored. Over time, Daniel stopped consulting me before speaking with his mother. Financial choices, travel plans, even minor home repairs, he'd mentioned them only after Patricia had already weighed in. I began shrinking my opinions, softening my voice, apologizing for preferences I hadn't even voiced yet. It felt easier than conflict. Safer than standing firm. But safety built on silence is an illusion. And illusions collapse when tested. The final strain came during the last recession. Our accounts dwindled. Creditors called. One evening, Daniel came home pale, saying Patricia had arranged emergency financing. "It's complicated," he muttered. "Just sign where she marks." I hesitated. That night, I called my grandmother. Before I could explain, she said softly, "Don't worry about the house. I've handled it." I assumed she meant emotional support. Now I understand she meant something far more concrete. 3 months before she passed, Eleanor handed me a small box wrapped in cream paper. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. In her elegant script, she had written, "Never let other people rush you into signing papers. Real protection is built long before the storm arrives." At the time, I smiled and tucked it away, thinking it was just her cautious nature. Now, standing on that driveway with divorce documents in hand, I realized those words weren't advice. They were a warning. And a promise. Because while I spent years trying to earn peace through compromise, my grandmother had been quietly building something far stronger, a truth no one could erase, a safeguard no one could sell, and a future that belonged entirely to me. The sound of tires rolling onto the pavement pulled me from my thoughts. A dark sedan approached slowly, parking neatly behind the moving van that still lingered at the curb. The driver stepped out first, older and silver-haired, wearing a tailored coat that suggested he was accustomed to entering tense rooms without raising his voice. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm. Behind him followed a younger associate, quiet and observant, holding a tablet and a secondary folder. Patricia's posture shifted instantly. The polished calm she had worn all afternoon fractured into something brittle. She forced a smile, stepping forward with the practiced grace of someone used to managing uncomfortable situations. "We are handling a private matter," she said smoothly. "I am certain you can return another time." The older man did not look at her. His eyes found mine first. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Mrs. Harper," he said. His voice carried no edge, only steady certainty. I had never met him, but I recognized him immediately from the photograph on my grandmother's desk. Walter. He had handled her estate planning for nearly 15 years. Walter extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, his demeanor entirely unhurried. "Your grandmother asked me to be here today," he said quietly. "Under specific circumstances." Daniel finally spoke, stepping down from the porch with forced confidence. "We already sold the property. The transaction closed. There is nothing left to discuss." Walter turned toward him. He did not interrupt. He simply waited until Daniel finished. Then he opened the portfolio and removed a cream-colored envelope. The sound of tires rolling onto the pavement pulled me from my thoughts. A dark sedan approached slowly, parking neatly behind the moving van that still lingered at the curb. The driver stepped out first, older and silver-haired, wearing a tailored coat that suggested he was accustomed to entering tense rooms without raising his voice. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm. Behind him followed a younger associate, quiet and observant, holding a tablet and a secondary folder. Patricia's posture shifted instantly. The polished calm she had worn all afternoon fractured into something brittle. She forced a smile, stepping forward with the practiced grace of someone used to managing uncomfortable situations. "We are handling a private matter," she said smoothly. "I am certain you can return another time." The older man did not look at her. His eyes found mine first. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Mrs. Harper," he said. His voice carried no edge, only steady certainty. I had never met him, but I recognized him immediately from the photograph on my grandmother's desk. Walter. He had handled her estate planning for nearly 15 years. Walter extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, his demeanor entirely unhurried. "Your grandmother asked me to be here today," he said quietly. "Under specific circumstances." Daniel finally spoke, stepping down from the porch with forced confidence. "We already sold the property. The transaction closed. There is nothing left to discuss." Walter turned toward him. He did not interrupt. He simply waited until Daniel finished. Then he opened the portfolio and removed a cream-colored envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My breath caught. Eleanor's script was precise, elegant, and entirely her own. Walter held it carefully between two fingers. "She instructed me to deliver this personally," he said. "Only if the property was transferred without your full knowledge." The evening light caught the edges of the paper, casting long shadows across the wooden steps. Patricia's smile vanished. Daniel's jaw tightened. Walter placed the envelope in my hands. The paper felt thick, familiar. It smelled faintly of lavender and cedarwood, the same quiet scent that always clung to my grandmother's study. I broke the seal carefully. The letter inside was short, deliberate. Written in her calm, unhurried voice. "Claire, if you are reading this, then they finally moved faster than they should have. Do not panic. Truth does not require volume. Open the folder Walter has brought. Let the document speak." I looked up. Walter had already opened the secondary folder. His associate stepped forward, placing 3 bound sheets on the porch railing. The top page displayed property records, the second showed a trust agreement dated 6 years earlier. The third contained transaction histories, neatly highlighted. Walter's voice remained level. "6 years ago, during your financial restructuring, your grandmother quietly secured a protected ownership interest in this property. The title was never fully transferred to your husband's name alone. It was placed under a family trust, with you as the primary beneficiary." Daniel's face lost its color. "That is impossible," he said. "I signed the refinancing. The bank confirmed full ownership." The younger associate spoke for the first time. His tone was respectful, clinical. "You signed a mortgage modification. You did not transfer the underlying trust interest. The property has been held jointly since the original restructuring. Selling it required dual consent." Patricia stepped forward, her voice sharpening. "This is absurd." Daniel handled everything. The lawyers verified the title. The buyers were informed. Walter adjusted his coat. The buyers were informed of a sale. They were not informed of an active trust structure. That is a material omission. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause. I watched Daniel's shoulders tense. I watched Patricia's hands curl into tight fists. For years, I had believed they were careful, calculated, in control. Now, standing on the steps of a house I thought was gone, I realized something entirely different. They were not masterminds. They were careless. They assumed authority because I had quietly stepped aside. They assumed ownership because I had never fought for it. They assumed I would sign whatever they placed in front of me. Walter looked at me gently. There is additional documentation regarding the financial transfers during the restructuring period. Several withdrawals were redirected without your signature. Daniel rubbed his temples. What transfers? The associate turned a page. 3 significant sums, withdrawn from joint business accounts during the same quarter your grandmother established the trust. The funds were moved into separate holding accounts under different management. Patricia's composure cracked. Her voice rose, sharp and defensive. Those were temporary investments. Standard portfolio adjustments. Everyone does it. The associate did not blink. They were not disclosed during the refinancing. They were not recorded in the joint ledger. They were moved independently. Daniel stared at her. The question formed slowly in his eyes, heavy with dawning realization. You told me those accounts were protected. You said we were safe. Patricia's breathing quickened. I managed the risk. I kept us afloat. You were too distracted to see the full picture. The word managed hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Walter closed the folder. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. At this point, the sale cannot proceed without resolving the trust agreement. The buyers were not properly notified, the title cannot transfer cleanly. And several financial movements require independent review. Daniel looked at the porch railing. At the documents. At his mother. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. What trust? The question hung in the cooling air, heavy and unanswered. Walter simply closed his portfolio. He did not need to explain what the law would do next. The documents on the railing spoke loudly enough. I watched Daniel's hands tremble as he reached for them. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the highlighted lines, the dates, the signatures missing where they should have been. His breathing grew shallow. Patricia stood rigid beside him, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking under visible proof. You moved money out of the business account, Daniel said quietly. His voice was not angry. It was hollow. The kind of tone that arrives when denial runs out of room. Patricia crossed her arms tightly. It was a temporary adjustment. I was protecting our position. Protecting us. Daniel let out a short breath. That is what I told Claire. That is what I told myself. He looked up at her, his expression shifting from confusion to something sharper. You said those accounts were secure. You said the refinancing was the only necessary step. I managed the risk. Patricia's voice rose, just a fraction. I kept us solvent while you were too busy panicking to see the larger picture. The word managed landed heavily between them. I remained completely still. For 27 years, I had believed this was a partnership. I had believed we were navigating storms together. But standing there, listening to the quiet unraveling of their shared narrative, I finally saw the architecture clearly. Daniel had never been the architect. He was merely the tenant. Patricia had always held the keys. She had always dictated the terms. And he had simply agreed because agreement felt safer than responsibility. You told me Claire would never notice the transfers, Daniel continued. His voice grew steadier now, carrying a quiet bitterness I had never heard before. You said she was too trusting to question the paperwork. You said the trust was irrelevant. Patricia stepped closer. Do not blame me for choices you signed. I advised. You executed. You were weak, she snapped. And now that consequences are arriving, you want someone else to carry them. That sentence broke something open. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a lock finally turning after years of rest. I had spent decades believing my silence kept this family intact. I had softened my voice, adjusted my boundaries, absorbed discomfort to maintain peace. I thought I was protecting my marriage. But peace built on one person's shrinking is not peace. It is surrender. Walter watched the exchange with professional detachment. He did not intervene. He simply allowed the truth to settle where it needed to land. Patricia finally turned toward me, her eyes narrowing. You knew about this. You orchestrated it. I looked at her calmly. I did not know until today. And that was the quiet beauty of my grandmother's planning. She had not needed me to be clever. She only needed me to be patient. Daniel stepped down from the porch, his posture slumped, his earlier confidence entirely gone. Claire, he said softly. Please. Say something. I looked at him carefully. At the man who once drove through snowstorms to bring me medicine. At the man who had slowly handed his conscience over to someone else. What do you want me to say? I asked. That I am sorry. He swallowed hard. I mean it. I know. That acceptance seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Because anger can be fought. Quiet clarity cannot be negotiated. Patricia abruptly turned toward the steps. This conversation is finished. We are leaving. Walter's associate did not move. The property remains under trust review. You cannot simply walk away from a documented discrepancy. Patricia scoffed. I will not sit here and be lectured by strangers. Strangers. The word almost made me smile. Because for nearly 3 decades, Patricia had treated me like the intruder in her own son's life. Daniel reached for my arm, then stopped himself. His hand hovered, uncertain. Please do not walk away like this. His voice cracked slightly. Once upon a time, I would have stayed. I would have explained, comforted, tried to repair what was already beyond fixing. But my grandmother's final gift was not money. It was perspective. And perspective changes everything. I stepped back, just enough to break the unspoken expectation that I should carry his guilt. I am not walking away from you, I said quietly. You already left first. The drive out of the city felt longer than usual. Streetlights blurred past my windows as the familiar skyline faded into mountain shadows. I did not look back. There was nothing left to carry. By midnight, the winding driveway to Aspen was covered in fresh snow. The estate gates opened quietly after Walter called ahead. Benji, the caretaker, met me at the heavy wooden door. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes held the same steady warmth. He took my coat without asking questions. You should rest, he said softly. I nodded, though sleep felt entirely impossible. Everything inside me had been rearranged. Instead of heading upstairs, I wandered toward Eleanor's study. The familiar scent of cedarwood and old paper greeted me immediately. Her reading chair still faced the fireplace. A wool throw rested across the armrest, folded exactly as she always kept it. On the center of her mahogany desk sat another cream envelope. I smiled through sudden tears. Even in absence, she knew precisely when I would arrive. I sat in her chair and opened it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Claire, if you are reading this, then you finally chose yourself. Good. I let out a quiet breath. The letter continued, calm and unhurried. You will be tempted to explain yourself to people who never intended to listen. Do not. Peace is not a negotiation. It is a boundary you keep. Beside the letter rested a leather-bound journal. I opened it to the first marked page. Eleanor's notes were sparse but precise. Claire apologizes for taking up space. Daniel defers to his mother instead of defending his wife. Quiet endurance is not loyalty. It is exhaustion. I closed the book gently. I traced the worn cover with my fingers, feeling the weight of years I could no longer change. The silence in the room did not feel empty. It felt honest. For the first time, I recognized that staying had not been strength. It had been fear disguised as devotion. I had spent decades believing love required constant adjustment. That if I simply softened my edges and kept the peace, I would eventually earn the kindness I deserved. I was wrong. Kindness given as a reward for silence is not kindness. It is control. Outside, snow fell steadily against the tall windows. The house felt entirely still. For the first time in years, my shoulders relaxed. The weight I had carried was never mine to begin with. I had simply mistaken someone else's burden for my duty. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the cold glass. The mountains stood dark and unwavering in the distance. They did not ask permission to exist. They simply were. And standing there, wrapped in the quiet certainty of my grandmother's foresight, I finally understood what had been missing all along. Real love never asks you to shrink first. 1 year later, morning light in Aspen fell across the kitchen table exactly as Eleanor once described it. Golden. Quiet. Unhurried. I brewed coffee while the kettle whistled softly, a sound that used to make me flinch. Now it simply marked another ordinary day. Healing never arrives as a dramatic revelation. It arrives in quiet repetitions. The first morning I woke without anxiety pressing against my ribs. The first evening I realized I had not checked my phone, waiting for someone else's mood to dictate my own. The first winter holiday where laughter replaced careful negotiations. These were not grand victories. They were gentle corrections. And they were enough. Benji carried firewood through the back door, humming a tune he never bothered to name. Marianne arrived shortly after, carrying fresh bread and complaining loudly about the mountain roads. Walter joined us later, debating football while Marianne arranged flowers on the counter. No one tiptoed. No one measured their words for approval. They simply existed alongside me. I spent years shrinking myself to fit spaces that were never designed to hold me. Real connection does not demand constant performance. I used to believe peace required constant maintenance. I thought if I adapted more and softened my edges, I would eventually earn the right to feel safe. I was mistaken. Safety does not need to be earned. It only needs to be chosen. That evening, after the house settled into stillness, I stepped onto the porch. Snow covered the valley like a blank page. I wrapped myself in Eleanor's wool coat and listened to the wind. For decades, I confused endurance with devotion. I believed staying proved my loyalty. But time teaches difficult truths. Sometimes the people you love most become the people you must outgrow. Sometimes walking away is not a failure. It is preservation. Your worth was never determined by how much you could quietly endure. You deserve a life where kindness is given freely, not traded for obedience. If this story found you today, I hope it offers a quiet reminder. Peace arrives the moment you stop asking for permission to take up space. Share this with someone who has stayed too long in places that slowly drained their spirit. Thank you for listening.